Conversations for change. Because the world is ready. Okay, so here we go. The unofficial, official first round of recording for a podcast. Conversations for change. And I'm actually kind of thinking about the first 2 or 3 topics all at the same time at the moment. And I think that's okay. The first conversation that I really was focusing on before all of this started, that I really was writing about, thinking about, and drilling into was originally the idea that there is no such thing as objective reality. But I think it's, first of all, better approached from the point of view of a question. Is there such a thing as objective reality? And asking that question in a way that provokes us to attempt to figure out the answer. Because one of the things that happens as soon as we attempt to figure out the answer to that question is that we realize that we have to actually attempt to define what objective reality is. And in order to define anything, there has to be somebody who can observe it and experience it. And as soon as we introduce the idea of an observer, we're back to subjective reality. So I think that's a really fundamentally interesting perspective for us to be considering in this space-time that we occupy these days. Particularly because I hear so many people talking about this thing they're calling extreme polarity, and I don't think that's actually accurate language. I don't think we're in a case or in a space or in a place of extreme polarity. I think we're in a space and a place of subjective realities colliding. Because we've come far enough along in my lifetime to go from understanding that there is no, first of all, there's no one to be the objective observer of this supposedly objective reality. Excuse me, because it can't be one of us. Because we all have our own points of view. Therefore, it would be a subjective perspective on the nature of reality from the beginning. And physics, especially quantum physics and quantum mechanics, have actually demonstrated to us without any, there's no more doubt or question about it, that the observer affects the outcome. The observer actually entangles the outcome to such a degree that the outcome changes as soon as you introduce the observer. So there, once again, I mean, I suppose there will be those, I'm sure of it in fact, who will say, well, then you could have a machine do the observing, but I don't think that changes anything. You still have to have a human who observes whatever the machine observes. Voila, we're back where we started. So, and I don't want to get lost in the minutia and the circling of that question. What I want to do is look more closely and more seriously at the whole concept of subjective reality and how it's created. Because what I know from my own personal experience is that the way I frame, the way I perceive, and the way I think about even any particular event, experience, topic, anything, definitely shapes the way I see it and the outcomes that I come to, the conclusions that I draw, the ways that I believe or don't believe something good or something better is possible, for example. And I know this is just absolutely the truth of how it is for all of us. You know, if you're in a bad mood, you don't notice what's great. And if you're in a great mood, you don't notice what's bad. And sure, that's all purely subjective, but it also causes and creates outcomes and experiences that we could say, we could extrapolate, go on to create our reality and our experience of that reality. So really the fundamental underlying place, I guess, that I'm trying to get to here is really looking at why it matters to ask the question, is there such a thing as an objective reality? Is there such a thing as an objective reality? Asking that question brings us to the place where we can step into a place of way more personal responsibility for the way we see the world. And until we learn that we have the capacity to choose how we see the world, we are still perfectly capable of falling back into a position of victimhood or feeling as if we are powerless in our own lives. And that simply isn't true. But it is absolutely true if you believe it's true. So, and this is sort of how I look at the whole question of, you know, where we are in the world today in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there is so much good and there is so much potential, and we have so many tools at our disposal and so many people, so many willing people to bring about the kind of change we want to see in the world, that when we fall victim to that idea of being the victim, when we go into that mindset of it's all bad and terrible and there's nothing I can do about it, we are short-circuiting the actual capacity that we have to create the change that will save us from ourselves. And until we figure that out and stop doing it, there is no way out. The first, shortest, most direct route out is understanding that we have the capacity, the tools, the power, the people, and everything we need to make massive change on this planet in a way that works for everybody and that's good. And not fall into the old habit of assuming there's some outer objective reality that we're being shown either on the media or wherever we're being shown it that's telling us otherwise, not falling for that. We just don't fall for it anymore. We don't give it our attention because it's our attention that fuels that perspective. And as soon as we give up the old habit of giving our attention to things that we don't want, we have all this energy and space to set our attention and our intention on what we do want. And as soon as we start doing that, the first thing that we experience, at least from my own personal experience, is that those things begin showing up in our lives. Those things we want begin to be visible all around us. But until we learn that that's how this all works, we don't have the incentive to do it because everybody around us is pointing outward, looking out into the environment around them and looking at what everybody else is saying, particularly those in the quote-unquote authority positions, those who are supposedly telling us what's going on the planet. From my perspective, they're just telling us what the people in control of the money want us to think is going on in the planet or on the planet. They're just telling us what the people in control and in power who have an agenda that they want to sustain want us to think about what is going on the planet. But it's not really what's going on the planet. And we know that because every day there are more and more things coming out, more and more revelations about the things that have been going on, quote unquote, behind the scenes from those same sources and forces that we were never privy to, that nobody ever told us. There's so much of it that you can't even keep up with it. And I don't suggest you try, because it's just another rabbit hole. And that rabbit hole doesn't go anywhere you want to go. Where do you want to go is the question. And that's why this question of, is there an objective reality? Does one actually really exist? Is a good place to start, because the answer actually might be no. And physics is proving every day more and more that is likely the case. That the answer is no. And that instead, the reality that we perceive is subjective, because it is created by those who are perceiving it as much as it is created by any other force in the universe. It's our attention to it, our focus upon it, and our decision making in our own minds about it that cause all of these entangled relationships to go into effect and to make change and to bring about change. Just in the same way that what you think about, you bring about, that old expression, right? If all you see and all you think about are the things that aren't working, you get more and more and more of that. And if all we think about and bring about is what we're told from outside of us is a quote-unquote objective scientific reality, this is how it is. Well, it's sort of like being told you have cancer. Those realities change constantly. If they didn't, it wouldn't be possible for people to heal from cancer. It wouldn't be possible for people to go into remission. But they do. And people heal from all kinds of things. And what I'm suggesting is we don't really understand the mechanism that causes those changes yet. We're just beginning to get an inkling of how all of this works. And for us to simply buy the idea that some outer authority knows better because they have more megaphone power puts us at a severe disadvantage. And it's not necessary. And actually, it's irrelevant. When we begin to understand that all of us have the power to co-create by virtue of how we look at things, how we think about things, and how we change our perspective in the moment about any particular situation, then the game is on. Then we can do anything. But until we give ourselves that permission and recognize that we live in a co-creative, supportive universe, we don't have a chance, because we'll just keep falling for the old story. We'll keep falling for whatever the narrative is, this day, this week, this month, this year, this decade, this century. And narratives are old news. What's exciting, what's interesting, and what's possible is that we're all understanding finally that we can change things by virtue of how we approach them, how we think about them, and how we act with our new thinking and our new processes of what we believe is possible. And as soon as that changes, then miraculously the things that we believe are possible begin to be possible and begin to happen. And I've seen it so many times in my own life and in the lives of people around me that there's no question in my mind anymore. I know this is how the universe works. But it's not my job to convince anybody of that. What I'm trying to do is just open the door to a question of what's possible if we step into this place where we say, maybe, just maybe, all reality is subjective and it requires an observer in order for it to form, to come about, to be. And instead of assuming that human beings are the only observers, we say all consciousness, all living forms, even non-living forms, contain consciousness, because consciousness is the foundation of everything in this universe, and there is only one mind. So that means every separate part of this universe is connected to the whole and has an interactive relationship in its own creative experience. That's a whole lot different than extreme polarity. It's so multidimensional and so multifaceted that polarity can't contain it anymore. And I think that's what we're seeing. Polarity can't contain it anymore. The only way polarity can contain it is if we go back to the outer authority position of black versus white, dark versus light, left versus right, all these given antagonists who are already on the playing field of that mindset, who are the pieces being moved around on the board. If you go back to them, sure, you can call it polarity, but it's such a limited view, it doesn't even begin to touch it. Think about it. Think about how many people there are who are beginning to figure out that their bodies are not going to get healthy unless they change the way they think about their bodies, the way they think about the food they eat, and the way they think about their own interactions with this whole system. How many young people are saying, I'm going to grow my own food, I'm going to do it my way, I'm going my way. And some of them are going to be on one side of that polarity spectrum, and some of them are going to be way over on the other side. Some of them are going to be quote unquote left, and some of them are going to be right. And some of them are going to be conservative, and some of them are going to be liberal, and some of them are going to be open to the ideas of all this new change that's happening in the world, and some of them are going to be absolutely opposed to it. But that is not going to be what they have in common. That's just going to be what the polarity machine can pull out of them when that's the game we're playing. But what if we just stop playing that game? Then all of a sudden, all those people are actually going down the same path from different perspectives, right? They're having their vegetarian meal, or they're having their grass-fed beef, or they're having their whatever they're having, regeneratively grown vegetables, because they are on a new path for themselves that is outside the scope of that polarity system. And the only way you can capture those people and put them back into the polarity is if you take them down a road that's about something that's not really what they are about anymore. So it's a very interesting place and time that we're in, because we have the power to make new choices. But we're also still so used to looking outside of ourselves to be told how it's supposed to be and how it is and what's real and what's not. And even this whole question of what's real and what's not is now becoming way more visible as so many people go on inner journeys where they're connecting to spirit and to aliens and to all kinds of different information sources and places, their own guides, angels, you name it. And all of that is being brought forth at the same time. So I was saying to somebody the other day, you know, there was a time when we would have a man go up into outer space, like an astronaut would go circle the Earth, and we would all hear his firsthand account of what it was like to be in orbit around the planet and what it did to him and what he experienced. And of course, even those experiences we were shielded from them. The astronauts weren't allowed to tell us a lot of things that they felt until much later. But at least we could look at each other and say, yeah, that guy, we know, he was in that space capsule up there. We know, we could see that space capsule or that shuttle go by overhead, and we hear him talking. And so at least we have a common physical connection to some experience that we can hear his perspective on. And we can agree that that's his perspective on that physical experience that we all agree that he had, at least for the most part. But now people are literally tuning in through their own inner connection to source and to information and bringing whole different levels of story, some of which may or may not be something any other one of us wants any part of, frankly. But this is the level of subjective reality that we've reached. And if you're someone who has had, for example, a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience or any one of these rather profound spiritual experiences, you know better than anybody else that those experiences are, quote unquote, more real than even this life is to you, for the most part, for most people. Nobody can talk you out of them, and they are purely subjective. And whether you had them because you were dead for 20 minutes, or you had them because you went out of body, or you had them because, for whatever reason, it doesn't change how you feel about them and the change they make in you once you go through them. So, in a way, they're kind of the more extreme example of the most subjective reality that's possible. And maybe that has to lead us back to a place where we talk instead about not an objective reality, but a consensus reality. That's the way Seth used to talk about it. We all came here and we all agreed. There were certain things. There were certain rules. Gravity applied. You didn't just fly off the planet. And a consensus reality is probably a whole lot closer to the truth of what our experience here is. But our consensus is beginning to fracture because we're going through this great change, which arguably none of us truly understand. I mean, certainly none of us have an answer about what is actually happening to us. We have a lot of people making assumptions and taking good guesses and having experiences that they share with us that give us insight about it. But the truth of the matter is, we've never been here before. And I'm reminded of a teacher I had years ago in Hawaii, Michael's son, who used to run a course called On Course that was just a phenomenal course. And I've been to several versions of that course with him, but the very first time I ever went through that course with him, we were having a conversation, and I was at that time a newly single mom, and I was struggling with a decision I had to make, and I didn't know how to handle it or what to do, and I was extremely frustrated because I felt like I should do better, and I should know better, and I should be able to make a more clear decision. And he said to me, well, he asked me a question. He said, have you ever done this before? Have you ever been in this situation before in your life that you can remember? And I said, no. And he said, well, then I suggest you start playing a game we'll call I've Never Done This Before. And give yourself a break and start asking yourself questions that help you figure out how to navigate this thing you have never done before. Like, what are the possibilities? Where could this lead? What is it that I'm actually wanting to accomplish by making the decisions I'm facing right now? Is there some outcome I'm looking for? Or am I simply trying to resolve existing issues? But start with the framework. I'm playing a game I've never played before, because it will open your mind and it will set you free from this sense that there's something you should already know about how you're supposed to deal with this. And I think really all of us on this entire planet right now would do well to ask ourselves that question. And if the answer, which I think it is this is a game we've never played before, then start opening ourselves up to new ways of thinking about how we might approach something we don't know that much about yet. And how do we get the most out of that? We certainly don't do it by beating ourselves up because we don't think we know what we should be doing. And we don't do it by listening to other people who are trying to tell us they do know what we should be doing. Because here's a clue. They haven't ever done this before either. And even if you want to join the camp that says, oh, this is a repeat of Atlantis, I'll go there, sure. I'm still going to tell you, it's a repeat then. It's not Atlantis, so it's not the same, which means we've never done this before. We have a different opportunity now than we did then. Whether or not this is that is irrelevant. The question is, where are we? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know where we are. But we can find out. And the way we find out is by asking intelligent questions about what we see around us and what's possible. And by looking at the people who are doing their best to give us the best answers they can with whatever they're working with. Whether that's David Johnson and his Johnson-Su bioreactor, building fungal life to put into the soil and to help restore the balance on this planet, or it's somebody who's figuring out how to clean up the oceans, or it's somebody who's figuring out the best way to work with kids so that we open up their creative, imaginative genius instead of turning them into ADHD, mentally and emotionally disturbed young people. There's so many possibilities here. The question is, which way are we looking? And if we're always looking out towards some authority position that says this is the reality and this is how it is, and allowing ourselves to have all the potentials and possibilities stolen from us because we do that, then it's my suggestion we're doing it wrong. But it's okay, because we can change what we're doing. We can always change what we're doing.